Hello there, it's Kermit Carter with Flowers by the Sea. We're going to talk real briefly about root bound. What is root bound, and do salvias get root bound? And if they are, what do I do about them? So a condition of being root bound is something that one can only determine by examining the roots of a plant. So I've got a Salvia gemensis here. It's been in the pot a while, and I'll pull it out of the pot and we can look at these roots. And this is a plant that some people would call root bound, others may not, because the root ball has entirely covered the surface and in the bottom, and it's starting to get a little firm. Okay, so that's something on the edge of what someone might call root bound. This is a Salvia gestniriflora. It's a large growing shrub from Mexico. I want to point out the roots here that are growing out of the stem of the plant just above the level of the soil. Those roots are an indication of how salvias grow, and we'll talk about that more in just a minute. So I'm going to remove this from the pot, and that's slow release fertilizer on the side there. And you can see this too is fairly solid and compacted, and in fact in some of the areas the roots have turned very dark, almost black, and those are probably dead roots. Okay, and where the fertilizer is, often the roots die out right around them. It does do less harm than good. And we'll pull a couple more out here. This is a Salvia elegans, the variety Golden Delicious. Oh, lovely pineapple fragrance. And that's a plant that a lot of people would say is not root bound. The roots are not as dense on here. It's still kind of soft and not hard. The roots haven't circled around and grown and grown and grown. And then the last one, and I'm brave with this, trying to get it out of the pot. This is a Japanese woodland salvia, Salvia glabrescens, and they tend to have massive root systems. I don't know what it is. Maybe the soil in Japanese woodlands is shallow, but all of the species from Japan tend to be very, very large in terms of their root system. And I thought I'd have to. I brought my handy pruning shears. There comes a time in every plant's life where you may need to use pruning shears to get the pot off. And the roots are so bound up in here, and I would call this one somewhat root bound. We'll finally manage to get this off with some effort. There. So again, we see a little bit of the residue from that slow release fertilizer, but you see there's layers and layers of roots here. There's darker ones underneath that have died, and then there's new ones, lighter colored on top, that have grown. And that's a plant that most people would consider somewhat root bound. So let's talk about salvias being root bound, and I want to go back to this Salvia gestniriflora, the Mexican species. Look at these roots coming off. Oftentimes in humid situations, we'll get roots coming from way up, halfway up on the plant, trying to grow down to the soil. That's the nature of how salvias grow. And so salvias in general suffer very much less than other plants with the condition we call root bound. None of these are ones that I would throw away or say those won't grow. All of them will take off right away. And let me just show you a couple of easy techniques to deal with. So here we've got one that is on the edge of being root bound. I've got a couple of tools here with me, and some people like to use a fork. You can use a kitchen fork, an old kitchen fork. This is a garden fork, and just break up the roots on the side. That's all it takes. That will, and then I took a little bit off the bottom. So that little bit of attention to that plant will make sure that once it's planted out in a pot or in the ground, that those roots will grow out very dramatically and very quickly. That's all you need to do. This plant will double or triple in size within a month. planted into the ground. And a smaller one with less roots wouldn't grow that fast. And that's something that salvias do and not a lot of other plants follow. This one, the Salvia elegans, to me that's not the least bit root bound. If you're very concerned, you might gently with your finger break up a little bit on the bottom, but that's about all it would need. You see there's not a solid mass of roots there. There's soil. So this plant is in excellent condition and would need very little attention, if any. I probably wouldn't bother. This one, the Salvia Greggii, kind of on the margins of being root bound. We can use the fork. There's another technique that I often use, and that is, this is an old serrated knife, used it so much the serrations are worn off. Probably used it for 25 years or more. And I cut, and I'll turn this way so you can see, a 1/4 inch or so off the bottom of the root mass. And that's all I'll do. And fresh new roots will come out all around there and they'll grow just beautifully. That's really, nothing more needs to be done for this plant. And even if you didn't do that, it would certainly grow well. And then we get to the glabrescens, the Japanese native. And that's, I could pound nails with it. It's hard. So I'm going to be a little more aggressive with this plant. I'm going to go in and kind of break a little bit off the bottom, kind of untangle some of these roots, and then using my fork, and again you can use a kitchen fork if you don't have a garden fork or a stick or anything you've got. I'm going to break that up a little bit, and you see that's really all it's going to take. It's loose now. That will grow out, and this plant will bloom this autumn and be a lovely, wonderful clump. If we had a smaller plant with a smaller root mass, it may not bloom this year. And we really try and send plants that are going to grow for you quickly. So that's the basis. That's what root bound is. If you didn't know, now you do. And salvias don't suffer from it much. But if you get to the point where you need a little of attention, we've shown you how to do it. Hope it helps.